If you're wondering why I'm wearing the same clothes as I was the last time you saw a video of this nature, it's because I'm recording the intro and outro bits for both of them back to back, because I'm very smart like that, even though a lot of you would debate that in the comment section. Why am I opening up the trolls to bash my own intelligence? Am I kind of masochist? I mean, if I have to watch this show most of the time and love and hate it, you'd probably understand why. Anyway, Season 9 is not fully done for me. I have another missed episodes video to tackle. Thankfully, there's only 3 to get through this time, numbers 21, 22, and 23. I'm on to the last chapters of this friendship book. Let's hope it actually gives me something of worth to show for itself. On this, the 3rd missed episodes edition of the season of Pones N Stuff. After the conclusion of the last Daring Do episode and the subsequent announcement and airing of this one, I wondered to myself, was this really necessary? Season 7's Daring Done gave us a look at what happens outside of the pages of the books, especially regarding what could potentially be left behind after her artifact sourcing adventures. Sure, it was all a ruse by Caballeron, like most of them were, but at least it allowed Daring Do herself to come to terms with what impact she has on the places she visits and becomes truer to herself against public criticism that may follow from it. When you look at the synopsis of Daring Doubt 2 seasons later, it looks awfully familiar, and don't lie to me by telling me it doesn't. Daring Do has to fight off public criticism that Caballeron orchestrated, proving her intentions while Caballeron does the same. It just seems like a shameless rewrite that only looks to shoehorn Daring Do into this final season and be done with it. The fact it wasn't written by character regular GM Barrow either means that this could be in for a bumpy ride. Nicole DeBuck tried to do what Barrow did best with the Daring Do character and her stories, wrapping up some quite serious morals around some action-adventure pastiche that we could all enjoy, creating some episodes that were solid, unspectacular, thanks to the balance of the fun and tension that was created from them. Now, DeBuck saw what the severity of Daring Do and Caballeron throwing disingenuous bombs at each other could do, and the fact that it was a little too heavy-handed for its own good. So, with the help of an overbearing moral, it allowed us to have the adventure and thrill-seeking fun that we wanted, doing so with a bit of a caveat by ramming that listening is key to understanding message right down your throat to the point where it laid you gag, which is not a very pleasant sight to envision, but I had to do it for the purposes of critical analysis. If it wasn't occasionally hilarious thanks to the MacGuffin of dreams in the Truth Talisman artifact, I'd have wanted to lynch this episode for the crime of patronising its audience in public, because unlike Daring Do's prior escapades, it didn't feel all that genuine considering the characters, serving more as a moral trebuchet hoping its target would be hit, but getting so much guidance along the way that it was too conveniently orchestrated for its own well-being. The characters and story were attempting to preach righteous virtue, showcasing that under the right circumstances, everyone's intentions are misunderstood. But it was tiring to see unfold as the pace tried to keep up with the shift before resting into normality that it wasn't really comfortable with. If not for the naivety of Fluttershy often being an adorable comedic icebreaker, this wouldn't have been as fun to watch as it ended up becoming when I actually look at the broader picture. I couldn't buy that Caballeron was a sympathetic antagonist for a second, and lo behold, it was lying, proving the plinth he preached on was made of straw, not stone, whilst Rainbow's quickness to believe in the moral after denying it for most of the episode and taking sides was offensive to my eyes and ears. It was done to ensure that Axolotl felt like the real quote-unquote sympathetic antagonist, when much like the others and his rivals around him, they never warranted it in the first place. This episode was an exercise in futility, creating an armistice between characters who honestly didn't deserve it. Daring Done then? Well, it did its job with mind-numbing efficiency and threw its leftover scraps to the ground, hoping that pigeons would go for it. I mean, they're the only people who would want to feast on this, but thankfully to them, it wasn't a total bust. Now, sure, it showed some character writing and voice acting were present, but they were misguided, and the story was structured well thematically and showed some genre stability. The animation had enough qualities to fawn over, but the buck stops at the moral and the musical absence, outside of some minor motifs that further fuel its downfall. Was it outright terrible? No, but it bloody sounds like it was, which is the major problem. When you skim away all the fat, you don't really have a lot to look at, and what it does well, but even I have to really start pinching myself, wondering if I'm starting to go off the deep end right as this show ends. I understand entirely that this was one misstep, one burn from the lava, one collapsed tunnel away from ending up at the bottom of the pile. It just got superbly lucky in that what it managed to make was solid. Well, as noted, unspectacular, but much worse than what came before it. And I understand that Duboc wanted to put her own spin on Daring Do to make her story, give the character some closure in a way that we weren't expecting, but falling back into the usual cliched story mindset and failing to adjust accordingly with the moral density around it ensured that it wouldn't get out alive without a lot of battle scars to show. If not for the laughs I got, we would be looking at a homicide, not an assault, on the eyes and brain. For an episode as vapid and pointless as this is, I can thankfully take a check to the bank, cash it and make bail. I would just hope that I wouldn't be running from the law for too damn long. This was an episode that deserved a bit better, even though it managed to scurry away from the pit of despair as fast as it bloody could. Overall, Daring Doubt scored a total of 7 out of 25, which is a D-. Not a good start, but, well, it has to get better than this, right? We follow on with Growing Up is Hard to Do, and boy ain't that the truth. This felt like a Season 1 episode where the writers decided to throw characters into an intriguing yet stupidly compromising situation, shove a simplistic moral hard down the young audience's throats, and see what fun could be salvaged from putting these characters into a position where they act stupider than they would normally do for the sake of plot convenience and the conflict. Now, I'm sure you may be thinking, Fred, that sounds like a familiar situation to be put in. Well, if it isn't familiar with you, it should be, because I'm getting flashbacks to Over the Barrel, a Season 1 episode so obtusely dense and so proud of what it was trying to preach that not a lot could be salvaged from it at all. Does this episode end up committing the same atrocities? Well, surprisingly not, but there is some relatability to be had where I think it would want to get out of its Season 1 brethren's shadow. Like I said for the last episode, this one wanted its moral to be as clear as day, and with a lack of subtlety ensured that we heard its cries for attention very loudly, linking back to the main 6 words with accuracy only a clairvoyant would crave for. Thankfully, it wasn't as dense as Daring Doubts was, utilising itself for thematic and character progressing effect, where its purpose served the episode much better. Did that result in a compelling story? No, as it felt as watered down as humanly possible, relying on newcomers Biscuit, Spur and Fluffy, whatever the blue hell that thing is, to supply our small but now big flawed protagonists with much needed safety nets aplenty. The morals insistence ensured this episode about maturity and heeding the orders of your elders felt surprisingly out of place this late on. Hell, having this episode happen after The Last Crusade feels like a massive waste and shows how unequivocally out of touch it is in totality. Without this moral coming through with purpose and some razor-sharp precision, we wouldn't have this episode at all, and it shows, leading to the story's flat nature becoming more cumbersome the longer it went on, despite the fact it wasn't at all cringy, outside of a few minor moments where the insistence they were adults got on my nerves. and I'm pretty sure you felt the exact same way too. If not, then you haven't matured enough to appreciate how uncomfortable that was. This shoehorned moral made the CMCs as characters regress to what they were like prior to their cutie marks and their responsibilities and their maturity, and while it served as a nice wake-up call for the adults watching to realise how much they have grown since they were kids, it did very little else, proving taxing to witness even on a surface level. The supporting characters of the main six mostly served to drive the plot forward, whilst our fleetingly seen newcomers stole the show, even when the voice acting from all concerned was not as good as it honestly should have been given the circumstance, outside of the fact that Michelle Kramer, Claire Collette and Madeline Peters did their utmost to lower their voices a tad for their adult forms, which I appreciated, because that's a subtle thing that a lot of people may not have picked up on. You guys definitely earned your paychecks with that choice. If the story and writing faltered, with the moral doing its job but annoying in the process where it hurt itself, what could this episode fall back on? The animation and thankfully the music. Speaking of the latter, that musical number, Being Big Is All It Takes, was catchy and insanely fun, and definitely showcased the CMCs as their rambunctious best, even though they were older, but that's the point of it all, with the vibrant and eclectic visuals doing their utmost in sync with them to make it work extremely well. To the animation's credit though, there was a lot to celebrate in terms of that song, as well as the varied locations, new character designs, and some nice effects. However, with most of the major pieces being inside the song itself, I couldn't be too praising, whilst the score was mostly non-existent, leaving said song to pick up the pieces. All in all, this was more enjoyable than I anticipated it to be, despite the fact its flaws hit me over the head to the point where I can feel my own blood seeping out of my skull ever so slowly. It wasn't the big final hurrah that The Last Crusade was, and stupidly, it wasn't even the CMC's final appearance, as the next episode covered that. It was entertaining, but only when I could scrape the obtuse moral away from proceedings. Even then, it was down to visual and musical frivolities to save the day and its blushes. I'm disappointed, albeit slightly relieved that this was better than what came numerically before it, despite plagiarizing from a very similar crib sheet. Overall, growing up is hard to do, scored a total of 9 out of 25, which is a D+. Only a very marginal improvement. I'm not feeling too confident, so I'm hoping the last episode of this trio can deliver the goods, because if not, we are going to have a pretty nasty car wreck on our hands. Finally then, we step forth onto the Big Mac question. No, not whether you should buy one or not when you have a case of the hungries for some burgers, but whether the monosyllabic stud of Ponyville and his baking bride-to-be will tie the knot. Of course they bloody will, it's a goddamn little kids show. Nothing can go wrong in the end. And if you don't believe me, there is actually an entire piece of legislation that highlights that. Anyway, that will not stop the show from trying to make the process of getting there much more important than the event itself that surrounds it. It's not the first time they've done it, so why expect anything less? It's up to Spike, Mrs. Cake, Discord and the CMCs to ensure that both of them propose properly. And, well, if this doesn't scream out to you as both a breakup, breakdown, and hard to say anything sequel in more than just name, then I don't know what will. Not to mention the fact that it's Big Mac and Sugar Bell's proposal. It should be none of their business. Which just goes to show you that this episode is a dumpster fire just waiting to be lit, and I've got the goddamn matches. I'm gonna keep this as short as possible, because the end did not justify the means here, because, as expected, the build-up did nothing to make the journey that carried us feel like it was actually worth watching. Sure, Big Mac and Sugar Bell getting married at the end was a lovely moment with some liquid pride flowing, but did I really have to sit through a story that existed as one cobbled together flashback? No! And despite the framework for it being surprisingly sturdy, it fell down under immediate pressure despite pacing itself somewhat competently. It relied, much like those prior encounters I mentioned, pushing your anxiety buttons at every possible juncture, being relieved only once it ended, and that wasn't entertaining for me throughout. Big Mac calmly stated that everything he had done in regard to Sugarbelle had been a huge mess, but they still loved each other anyway, which just sums up this and its prior brethren very well indeed. This was an episode that forced you to grit your teeth and get through it without much to really garner any enthusiasm. Everything the story had was forcibly pushed to make you feel as uncomfortably tense as possible, with all of us knowing it was going to turn out alright, meaning any intention of drama fell on deaf ears. Whilst Discord's appearance was restricted more than it had any right to have been, meaning visually and musically, outside of a couple of inspired motifs and moments, it was flatter than most Discord episodes have been, bar a couple, and I'm not happy with that. And despite being out of control, this situation just had very little wiggle room to flex its muscles and make itself any more than just an inconvenience that would be easily resolved. The characters did what they always do in these situations, cause problems out of their control, and the results, well, they were clear as day to see, leading to an episode that was, well, fleeting in real substance, where the more I look at it, the more its flagrant efforts of trying just felt like an absolute turgid use of my time. Sure, it had potential, like most and all episodes would do, but all it did was commit the sins of old and expect to come out with different results. That's the definition of insanity right there, people. At least the breakup breakdown tried to be positive and weave an interesting moral and story around it. Here? Did we need this tidal wave of ineptitude to exemplify that romantic gestures are best done simply when you already had Hard to Say Anything with similar characters extolling that exact same virtue? All in all, this just makes this episode's pointless nature even more emphatic, because outside of wedding these two, what else does it show for itself? It's just so disheartening, and it makes me really annoyed, and as you can tell, I really haven't enjoyed this episode at all. Sure, there were some musical bits I liked, there were some animation bits I liked, it was paced okay considering what was around it, but outside of that, there was nothing here. Despite the cast of characters at hand, I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't even thinking that it could have ended up this badly. I believe they were capable of better, and they failed to justify my trust. Now, I understand this episode was done to tie up loose ends, but for it to be executed in such a haphazard and carelessly done way just makes me grimace. Outside of some tender and heartfelt moments, Big Mac and Sugarbelle, by the looks of it, have just led me down a very rough cobbled path constantly, and I really should have seen that there was going to be a moment or two where I tripped in some puddles and, well, they would just laugh at me, hoping that I would still be smiling and take it all in good nature, but as you could probably tell, I haven't here. Hard to Say Anything was atrocious. The breakup breakdown was enjoyable, if disappointing. This? I don't know what I can say to really define it. All I can say is that the fact that this episode is the last one that we would see prior to the triple threat finale is immensely discouraging. It makes its quality look even worse, which, considering what has already come before it, is quite a shock indeed. And it finishes up Ponyville, Spike, the CMC, and Big Mac's contributions without the dusting of icing sugar that it wanted. Instead, getting, well, grated fecal matter to where it stains and sours the taste of this hulking great mess of a meal, to the point where I just want to send it back to the server and be done with it. Overall, the Big Mac question scored a total of 3 out of 25, which is an E. Yeah, if it wasn't for those little moments of lucidity, this could have joined 246 Great at the bottom of the pile. I am that damn serious. In closing, I have one thing to say. that just sums everything you've just heard up. How the blue hell am I or anyone supposed to get hyped up for a series-ending triple header if this is the best they could offer as a hype machine? I'm sorry, the hype train has rolled out of the station with multiple carriages missing. I don't want to sound like an entitled fan, because I personally don't like doing that kind of thing. I expect the professionals in charge of this kind of thing to know what they're doing, know what their audience wants, and supply it. Well, what we got here was nothing of the sort. I mean, okay, being the pragmatist that I am, and the person who wants to appease both sides, there is something we can get from the Daring Do episode we saw here. I mean, it's completely unnecessary, but you can at least pick a few little bits out. The CMC episode. Yes, there are a few good things to pick out, even though it is completely unfit for purpose. Put The Last Crusade here, then we'd be talking about something fucking beautiful. The thing is, though, at least for those two, I can be a little bit kind. Big Mac Question can fuck right off. Because you can try your damnedest to staple together the Frankenstein's monster of the worst parts of the breakup breakdown and the entirety of Hard to Say Anything together and expect it to walk, yet it then limps and bleeds to death on the floor because it just has no sense of purpose at all. And to have the downward slope that was already happening for the last missed episodes video I did, which covered 7 episodes, which gradually, apart from a few blips, went down the same trajectory, to have these follow on in the exact same way, albeit without the complete faceplant that was a 0-rated episode, it makes me feel really, really aggrieved. Because this is not what I expected. This is meant to be the end of the show. This is meant to be something that you're going to remember. And yet, well, the lead-up just shows that I mean the writers just didn't have any sense of planning about this. And I'm going into the finale, the final 3 episodes that this show are ever going to put out, feeling nervous. I didn't want that. That's all I would have asked for, is just to get to the end with stuff sewn together and woven into a lovely big fabric so the book could shut with some form of humility and decency and poise and grace. And yet what we've got here is a broken ankle from a pirouette too far spun. I am hoping that the finale rocks my socks. I am hoping that the finale gives me everything I want. Because based on these ratings alone, if it manages to do so, it'll be a goddamn miracle. So, we've only got one more edition of Pones N Stuff left, folks, that's reviewing episodes of any kind. So, take it in, work up your anticipation, and hope that I am not in this kind of mood, because if I am, by the time those episodes air, it's gonna be the end of the world as we know it, and I will not be feeling fine, that is for damn sure. I am praying that this all works out okay. Please, Hasbro, DHX, Allspark, give me what this season needs to make sure that this ship doesn't capsize into oblivion and leave a massive stain on this show's legacy. I beg of you. I have been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this has been, as always, the CC Network. And I will see you next time for the end of days.